Spencer, can you hear us now?
Can, thank you.
So folks can see the participant count is still creeping up, so we're probably going to wait just a minute or two. But while we're waiting, perhaps you'd consider volunteering to serve as a scribe or backup scribe. All you need to do is let us know your name by putting it in the chat room or speaking it aloud. Either one would be great. Thanks. Okay, we really will need a scribe. And so I've put on my video so you can imagine me peering down at you as each of you tries to look quickly at your laptop and not catch my eye. Obviously, you cannot catch my eye very easily since you don't have your video on, but it would be very useful. And as a reminder, we don't need this person said this and then the next person said that style. We have a recording. That's all going to be handled by the recording. We're just taking note of the decisions. So it's a relatively low effort type of thing to do, and we would really appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, well, we've climbed up enough that I think it's probably time to go ahead with the note well. If you are new to the IETF, this note well is not the sum total of IETF policies in effect. It is instead a pointer to them. You can read these reminders at the top, and then the definitive information is in a set of linked documents in the bottom. Essentially, there are some IPR requirements and some behavioral requirements that you must adhere to. So we would appreciate your paying attention to this, both in today's meeting and in any further meetings. Thanks very much. For the chat, several of you have already used the chat panel inside of Meet Echo. You can also use Zulip directly. We will use the queue within Meet Echo to talk, since this is a virtual only meeting. And we'll try and optimize the queue a little bit. If there's somebody who indicates to us that they're direct reply, for example, let us know that in chat. and we'll try and get the direct replies in. But generally speaking, we'll just go in queue order. Suas is noting in the chat that he can see and hear fine. That's great to hear. We are still looking for a primary note taker and one backup. So if you can serve as one or the other, now would be a great time to let us know, because we will have to pause the entire process of 3 hours while we wait for somebody to sign up for this. And it could get very tedious for 3 hours worth of looking at this one slide. Once again, it doesn't have to be this person said X and that person said Y. It's just recording the decisions. Alan asked if there's a prize for the scribe. No, our next step is I will start asking my phone to roll a 22-sided die for me, and we'll ask people to invent excuses on the fly, depending on when their number on the die comes up. So really, this would go a lot faster if somebody would just agree to serve as scribe. Martin, Duke, thank you, Martin. Everybody else, we will deputize you as deputy scribes. Just leap into the note-taking tool there and help Martin out. Remember, you don't have to write everything down, Martin. It's just if we make a decision, and hopefully, fingers crossed, there will be a few decisions today for Martin and the backup scribes to write down, and we can go on from there. Thank you for not making me break out the 22-sided die. Ooh, Alan has pointed out wheelofnames.com. And again, to reflect from the chat, Martin has suggested that if you do say something in the mic and you want to make sure it's captured correctly, please do check out the notes as soon as possible. Well, obviously, you'll get a chance to look at them again when they get turned into formal minutes, but if you check them out earlier, that's even better. Now, agenda bashing. This is our current agenda, Administrivia and goals. We are 2 minutes away from the end of that section, so hopefully we can bash within 2 minutes and stay on time. Then we'll have 1 hour of discussion around the object model, presentation of the current proposal. We'll have a discussion of the relays, and then a 35-minute section on issues, trying to resolve some of the issues in the issue tracker, and then we'll do some wrap up and planning for Yokohama. Is there any bashing of the agenda?
Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The agenda looks mostly fine. The one question I would ask is, we have, well, okay, so two things have touched the intermediary design team since our last meeting, and one of them is we're still kind of inventing terminology on the fly, and it's not bad terminology, but we have no idea who else, what other people might think those words mean. And the second one was we're chartered for an architecture draft, and we're starting to get, we were starting to get into some things that might go better in an architecture draft. So maybe just adjusting the agenda to include something about, maybe this is under planning for Yokohama, but basically what the plan is for those two ideas between now, between now and Yokohama, and then of course beyond. We're not going to finish that instantly, but thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. It looks like there's Cullen in queue as well. Cullen?
Sorry, mine wasn't an agenda bash. I was only going to try and resolve the audio issue, but it seems to have resolved itself and it's in chat, so no worry.
Okay, so let's do this as Spencer suggests in the wrap up and planning for Yokohama. I think that might stretch the amount of time we need for that to 20 minutes. So we'll take that out of issue discussion unless object model or relays goes a little faster than that. Is everybody okay with that change? Okay. I also saw in the chat that you're getting a lot of clipping from my audio. It is a new system I'm using today, so it's possible that it is how I've got the system tuned. So I'm gonna, once we start the object model, I'll do a quick drop and let Alan take over running the slides, etc. for that, and log back in with a different mic. In the meantime, it looks like we have one more slide, which is our goals for today. Just a reminder, our aim is to get through Yokohama and into a state where the authors can publish drafts that can be adopted, with the intent that then we would start working toward drafts that we can start interoperability testing on from successive meetings. So that's the goal, overarching goal. We think for today, we're trying to get consensus, at least from those of you who joined us today, on the big rocks, the object model and relays. And then try during the issue section to determine which issues need to be resolved before a draft is adopted. So that's the goals for the meeting, and I think we're ready to go. And Miria is saying that the audio is fine, so I will not log out, but I think I will hand it over to Alan at this point. We do have things loaded as preloaded slides. If we want to have them run directly by the presenters, that's also possible. Alan, which way would you like to do it? Do you want to run the object model one, or do you want the presenters to?
Christian, would you prefer to request control here, or do you want me to do it?
I can certainly let you do it. It's not an issue for me. I'm kind of trying to keep it simple.
Okay, I do not see the preloaded slides in my view. Do you see them in yours? No.
Yes, I do. Okay. So it's just to the right of the hand.
Ah, I'm looking in the wrong place. I was looking in meeting materials.
Yeah. For some reason, they're all double, but they're the same. I checked.
Okay, I see it says it's, I'm not sure I succeeded in doing anything, but it says a new deck is being shared. Does that come from you, Christian?
Okay. No, I see a new deck is being shared. That's the only thing I see. I don't see
okay, let me try.
Any actual deck.
Okay. I also see two. Oh, you said there were two copies of everything. Now I got it. Okay. Oh. How about now?
Okay, here we are. That's good.
Victory.
So, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening for all of you around the world here. We have one big rock on the agenda, as Ted puts it, which is looking at the MOQ data model. We have a huge thread on GitHub of discussions about details of the PR for the data model, and and discussion of that. I've tried to keep it simple in this presentation and focus on the thing that we really want to decide. How do I change slide? Okay. The first thing that I've tried to do is start with the almost consensus that we have. And the almost consensus that we have is to use tracks as the building block in the MOQ protocol. Basically, we think of a track as a specific encoding of a media stream. I'm happy to have someone suggest another word than media stream, because media stream kind of conflict with the stream issue in Quick, etc. But so basically, you say, hey, suppose someone wants to watch a football game between Madrid and Barcelona. They will have a choice of multiple tracks, depending of which language they want to use, depending of which video format, depending of the richness of their devices. And how they pick that track is something that I don't think we should decide in MOQ, because I mean there's a big richness of decision there, and that's better left to user agent and scripts, catalogs, what have you. Second point, multimedia experiences typically involve multiple tracks. That's kind of obvious if we have a video conference with streams from a variety of participants, and probably many streams. Like in this case, I would have one stream for my video and one stream for the sharing of slides, and possibly a separate stream for audio. Those will have to be organized, but the organization is not part of the transport itself. That's kind of the decision. The organization is delegated to some kind of catalog, or maybe if people don't want to think of catalog as something that you download once and never update, maybe a live stream that provides you the upon time things, now look at this, now look at that kind of issues, and which gives you the tracks that you want to compose in order to have the experience. So two decisions there. How user pick a specific track, I think should be outside MOQ, because if we try to do that, we are just going to spin our wheel for a very long time. And the same for things like catalogs, which are indeed part of the applications using MOQ, but probably not part of MOQ itself, because there's so much variety that if we try to specify that, we are going to do either something which is only adequate for some experience, or something that is so generic that it's not a standard at all. Now, second part of the thing that we almost have in a consensus on is the presentation of what a track is. And the almost consensus is that the track is represented a series of objects. And an object is carrying some content, I mean, a part of the media stream, a part of the track. And that content typically will be encrypted, will probably not be visible by relays. I mean, we can decide to have extension of the architecture with the equivalent of back-to-back user agents and things like that. But as a basis, I mean, the relays do not see the inside of the media. And the object doesn't have just a binary blob, of course, also has metadata. And the metadata is used to manage transmission. And we'll go to the definition of metadata later. Different applications can define what an object is in different ways. The most common that we have seen so far is that an object is, for example, a single video frame, but that's just one possibility. Another possibility that was discussed on GitHub is the use of layered encodings with a series of layers providing further and further, higher and higher definition on the video. And in that case, it might make perfect sense to have each layer encoded as an object. I know that we had in Luke's implementation, an object is actually a group of blocks, in the sense of MPEG. From a protocol point of view, that's not a big issue. We just want to make sure that it can be carried and that these objects can be mapped into the transmission APIs afforded by Quick. Now, I said that we had almost consensus there. One point at which we do not have consensus yet is how objects are organized in groups. And there is a related point, which is how how the metadata is used to control transmission, in particular to congestion control. So we almost agree, but not quite. Among the issue are how do we name tracks? Do we have an intermediate object above the tracks that says, hey, this is a group of tracks of some kind? And what are the groups of objects? Let's discuss that. First proposition. This first proposition is based on the discussion I read on GitHub, and it seems to be kind of the middle point that people agree on, is to treat track names as URLs, and specifically as opaque URL. It is a URL in the sense that it can be parsed in the same way as HTTP to find the authority, and using the authority field, contact the provider of the data or the organizer of the data. But the track itself is opaque. The track name itself is opaque. So in the equivalent of HTTP, it will be that the pass component will be whatever the application says it is. It'll be sufficient to identify the track, but nobody can go inside, nobody but the application can go inside that blob and find that, oh, this pass is composed of this and that components that I can use. I mean, no, maybe there are, but that's for the application to decide. That's not for the transport level or the relays.
So you have a question now, Christian. You want to take them as them, or do you want to take them at the end?
Oh, we can certainly take them. And give me some time to have a breather.
Mo?
Well, the question is the clarification.
Yes.
That's weird. I hear my own audio echo. I hope this isn't bad for everyone else. The distinction between what can be an object, one important point that may be lost by this general flexibility to put a kind of granularity of object as a literal object. End-to-end encryption will require an author's auth tag someone. So when we have that authentication tag, you typically can't do anything with the media until you get that authentication tag and do the decryption. So we need to be mindful that the object granularity may be dictated by what the application wants to render, and it can't render anything until it has authentication tags for the end-to-end encryption context.
Yes, and that's probably some kind of overlook there. I have this mental model that the authorization is performed when the client or the relay first tries to access the track by asking the origin, hey, can I do that? In fact, that's the very reason why we have a URL and an origin, is that I can have a transaction there, and that transaction says, hey, I am a relay. I am getting a client that wants to connect to this MOQ interim video conference. Shall I let them? That's pretty much the authorization part. Now, whether we want to carry the authorization in each object with a higher granularity, I did not envisage that, because we typically do not do that today with HTTP. I mean, either you are allowed to read the content of a URL or you are not. You are seldom allowed to just read them in the odd lines. But we can certainly debate that later. I suggest that you open an issue for that. Is that okay, Mo? Okay, so let's continue. I mean, the way we see authorization here is that it's pretty much the same as HTTP. It's the client or the relays, I mean, do a transaction with the origin or a representative of the origin to define whether they are able to access the media or not. And the relays enforce that. Now, there is a little bit of architecture there. At some level, this kind of authorization issue is very similar to what we have in EAP, when a Wi-Fi router decides to let you in or not based on some remote authorization service. It's probably something we want to implement using OAuth, and it's probably something that we will have to detail. At this stage in the reflection, it's just something to say, well, it happens. It happens there. The user contacts a relay or a server, says, I'd like to listen to this track. There is an authorization exchange, and it's very probably an exchange, not just a single token. And at the end of the exchange, I mean, the relay is informed that, yes, you can serve that, or no. Now, that same transaction can carry more data. In particular, we have one debate which is very clear in the discussion, which says, hey, an origin that is basically the logical owner of the track is not necessarily the publisher. There are many systems in which the publishing is delegated to some kind of content management system. In video conferences, the publishing can be done by the different participants themselves. I mean, there is a rich thing there. So it may well be that the transaction there that we do is that during that transaction, the user will tell, oh, you want to look at this football game. This is the URL you shall actually use, and probably the URL is decorated with authorization tokens and whatever, so that you can get the actual content. So there might be some redirection happening at that level. So I think that this track names as URL is close to consensus. It's not quite consensus, but I'd like to declare consensus there at some point. Second proposition, we have a lot of discussion on GitHub on not just tracks, but also emissions or broadcast or things of various nature. And we discuss composition. We say, okay, the composition saying that I'm going to have Christian's video and Ted's video and the shared slide. That's a composition issue. I mean, it varies over time, etc. But in case of some media, like say video games, you will very probably have several tracks that are requested at the same time from the same publisher. And if you have the same publisher, you will want to do the authorization just once. So
you have a question from Spencer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually put my hand up for the previous slide, but let me do the one for this slide as well, and then I'll only interrupt you once. So, could you say a little bit about what an emission is? And if it's just track served by the same origin, that could be okay.
I wish I could. I mean, I'm not personally convinced that we need that concept, but the idea is, as I said, the idea is say, hey, instead of having a client do 5 different authorization requests for one video and another video and the terrain of the video game and the events from the game and etc. They may just do a single transaction that says, hey, I want to get that bundle, and with that bundle might be named. So I get that bundle, which is identified by URL, which we could call an emission. That's the name most people use for the concept. And then
go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then you do the authorization once, which will be the big advantage there. And then as a response to this authorization, you get the list of tracks that you shall download or process. And then the transmission of those tracks can start. That's one model. As I said,
Okay.
I am not terribly convinced. I think we could get pretty much the same service by carrying a list of track URL that are bound to be on the same origin in a single transaction.
Okay.
That will be just probably just equivalent in terms of transport and number of messages and number of transactions and wait time, etc. And will not need to add another concept. But hey, who am I? I can very well be wrong. And so we want to listen here.
Cool. So the thing I wanted to mention on this one is we had some conversations like in the last 4 days on the intermediaries design team, talking about a concept where basically a media sender was called an emitter. So like I say, I was just trying to understand whether these emissions had anything to do with the emitters that we were talking about on the intermediary design teams. I suspect that they're not, but we don't have to figure that out now. So
Yes.
I'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I'm looking at the question top popping on the chat room as well.
Yeah.
And clear. I mean, that's my gut feeling is I'd like to have a model that is as simple as possible. To say we do tracks, maybe we do several tracks at the same time, and then if you want to have a higher level construct, the application does it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, as I said, that's we can have a consensus discussion at the end of this presentation.
Yeah. So if I could just slide you back to the previous proposition for just one question. And that was basically, I wanted to make sure that this was good in your mind. Does this work the same way for people who are contributing content to the so basically in HTML
Yes.
land, put instead of get. So this is if I'm thinking about this for contributing media, this would be the same.
Well, yes, I did not go into the details of publishing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
clearly we have cases, we have basically two views on publishing. You have one publishing that says, hey, publishing media is done through some kind of content management service. It's not exactly the point of MOQ. The URL that defines the track points you to the content management service and you get the content from there. That's
Right.
one view. You have the other view, which is quite common in video conferences, in which the content is contributed in real time by the participants. And if the content is provided in real time by the participant, then it would make sense to have that content through relays or through whatever. And it would also obviously make sense to have an authorization transaction to decide whether Christian is indeed authorized to send video to Mitico right now.
Right. Cool. Thank you for both of those, Christian.
Okay. So now we go to the point in which we have a multiplicity of opinions, which is the notion of groups. We have a discussion about the internal structure of a track. And the first discussion of that internal structure is where that the objects are organized as a series of groups. So a track is composed of a series of groups, and each group is composed of a series of objects. That's, I think there is some, said like that, nobody objects. The one particularity is whether we want to tie that to synchronization. And it's very clear that any media experience will require synchronization points. You can do rewind, fast forward, seeking points in the media for streaming video. You can join a conference where it is in the middle of the flow, and you have to be able to join that in a way that is not jarring. You have to be able to resynchronize your experience after you have had a network event of some kind. So it makes sense to have synchronization points, which are defined as you can start transmission from that point. And if you have started receiving transmission from this point, then you can safely play the media, and it will be good. And what can be also done is that that's what we see in some implementation, is that if the system is overwhelmed and cannot send everything, it might abandon a current group and jump to the next one to diminish the load on the network. So that will be dropping the tail. I think, deciding that groups are indeed synchronization point is something that we should have consensus today, because otherwise, we are going to, I would say, wander in the moors. But
and your tool is starting to grow as people want to talk to you about it. Oh.
Okay. And then finally, proposition is on the group metadata, object and group metadata for congestion response. We know, especially if we have relays, that relays will have to implement some kind of congestion response, because if they find out that they're receiving data from the upstream at a rate higher than what the downstream can process, they have to prune some of that. Otherwise, you're going to make big queues, and those big queues make the experience terrible. That kind of dropping has to be controlled by metadata of some kind, with the goal being that the publisher, the applications, have a clear idea of what the network of relay will do, and they can use that clear idea of what the network of relay will do to organize their data in a way that makes sense and will give a good experience. Now, at that point, I wonder, and I would have to ask Ted, whether we want to have that discussion now or push it to a later time. I think I was not tasked to have that discussion right now.
So you already have people in queue for your proposition 3. So let's start there and see how far we get. Just from a time check perspective, we have about a half an hour to go.
Okay.
Mo, you're first in queue.
Yes, am I audible? I'm
Yes.
definitely audible because I can hear myself. I kind of agree that we need to nail down exactly what boundaries groups are delineating and making it so completely application specific that the semantics are lost. So one thing that immediately comes to mind is we may want to consider something like the groups are always stateless and the objects may be stateful between them. That's a little bit like saying that there's dependencies, but I think it's a little bit more in the line with understanding what relays and HTTP like elements would already understand. Stateless transactions would correspond to a group, but then stateful objects would be more like subgroups, sub-transactions, the actual transaction itself, continuing
So
chunks of the transaction.
a clarification first. Are you proposing that object within a group have a dependency to object within other groups?
No, well, it's not about the dependencies between the objects. It's about the delivery, because we're not trying to capture the application semantics because the application already knows its semantics. We're trying to capture what the different elements of the data model need to know about these semantics. And for the relays and the other elements, not the application itself, they need to know that the group is stateless and that the objects are stateful between them, so that there's fate sharing between those objects, but the groups can always be served statelessly.
Yeah, yes, I think that's the same meaning as saying it's a synchronization point. As in, we can start at the beginning of a group and we don't have to import state from outside, we can just play it. And indeed, we will have dependencies between the objects in the groups. We had some discussion of that as discussion of the congestion response, because the tricky part of the congestion response is that you want to trim some of the content of the group, but if you trim the wrong content, you make the whole media unusable because you have not seen the dependencies, and then that's bad. So we have to have a discussion as well on how exactly we explain those dependencies, and I would prefer that it not be a full graph of dependencies. Okay. Ted, is it your turn now?
I think so. Could you go back to proposition 2 for a second?
Sure.
Hopefully this will be. So I think that my perspective here is that we need to to get clear the difference between tracks which are served by the same origin and tracks which are served by the same origin, which are themselves interrelated. And I think you might have missed Cullen's question some time ago about whether in a layered encoding, the two different layers would be in one track or two. So I think we may need to come here and make sure that when we're talking about things above the track layer, that we have in the mental model both this is a collection, a set of things which are not related, and this is a group. And I really wish I'd used a different word just then. This is a collection, a set of things which come from the same origin but don't relate to each other. And this is a mumble frats that does come from the same origin and where the two things do relate to each other. And so I think we have a question that starts here and comes into group and several other places. And what we want to do at a metadata level about saying these bits are related, even if they're not necessarily required for the property independently decodable. And I think there's a good bit of discussion in the chat at this point suggesting that for the synchronization thing, we might want to rethink the naming of that to talk about, you know, an access point or something different. But I think from my perspective, the kind of basic thing of like, is this group handled together? I had missed before this proposition 2 and Cullen's question that handled together was by itself even ambiguous when you were dealing with layered encodings. So we may want to think a little bit more about a more generic mechanism for indicating the interrelationships that may not be as simple as required and not required.
Yes. Yes. I mean, well, first, we certainly need to dig further into the representation of layered encoding. And I think there are degrees of complexity between different solutions. If we have to introduce dependencies between tracks or dependencies between groups, that's a fairly big additional complexity. I think in the case of layered encoding, it would be much simpler to put everything in a single track and to have metadata on the objects in the track to understand how you play them together. But again, I mean,
okay. What this means is we're pushing this to the application layer, and if that's where it belongs, that's where it belongs. And I'm okay with that as a proposition for this. What that turns out to mean then is that the only case where you'll get this track set or bundle or whatever we want to end up calling it is when they're not required, they're authorized together, but not required to be rendered where there's no dependency among them for the rendering.
yeah, I mean, if there might be dependencies in the form of timestamps or whatever, but the application can put that in the object content. That's not something we want to be worrying about in the transport.
Okay, I think you're ready to hit Will up then. Will?
Okay.
Okay, audio test before I speak.
We hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Christian. 3 points. Can you switch to prop 3 slide? So firstly, yeah, there's a lot of discussion on the thread with this since you spoke. Synchronization, I think, is a misleading term here because it invokes sort of time sync as we used to it, syncing audio and video. This is more about joining the stream or accessing the stream. So I think it is it should be a fundamental property of a group as part of its definition. It's a point at which this track, which is a continuum of flowing data, that you can start accessing it. And the term of art I like is track access point, because that defines what it is. And there's a lot of correlation with stream access point that we're quite familiar with in the Dash world. Second point, it should also, by virtue of you being able to access it at this point, it's going to be independent or stateless, as has been previously described. So I don't need any other information to start consuming this track. It may not be audio, video. It could be lat long location or something like that. But the key attribute is it's independent from this point on. The objects within the group may depend upon that group. So they may depend upon you receiving the start of the group. The third point I think is important is it should have a numeric identifier, because that automatically conveys sequence. And it's going to be important for relays to be able to find the last group in order for you to join the track automatically. A client will not know what the data looks like in a track, and is going to ask for, give me the last group that I can join. And I think by having them numeric, we simplify the sequence. Otherwise, we have to convey it as a separate attribute. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
And I take the point about the nomenclature. Calling that track access point instead of synchronization point is probably less confusing. Luke?
Oh, hello. So first off, I think this is a great summary. I think these slides are fantastic because there's been way too much text. This is a good way of distilling it down. I just want to go over slide 2, or the proposition 2. As in, what's the point of an emission? The goal in my mind, emission, broadcast are the same thing in my mind, but it was always meant to be a way of saying these tracks are synchronized. As in, they share presentation timestamp, they share delivery order, so they can be prioritized relative to each other. So you can say audio from this emitter should arrive before video from the same emitter, for example. There's a bigger question is if you can do that synchronization when you have unrelated sources, as in 2 separate emitters, how do you prioritize between them? And my current answer is you can't. Like, this is effectively a property of an emission, is that it is synchronized. So I think it should be there. I think composition, just a layer on top that effectively says we don't know how to synchronize these 2 emissions, so have at it, client. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. And tracks a scope to an emission, so I'm not even sure if they need a separate URL or if they should just be scoped.
I hear you. I am not sure that everybody agrees with you, but I mean, the flip part of that is that if you build dependencies between tracks, it becomes pretty hard to manage that in the transport. But
I mean, fundamentally, I'm trying to, like, I'm using Meet Over Quick to deliver audio before video, and I think that's a pretty clear requirement. Like, during congestion, you should deliver the most important track first, which really requires that they be tied somehow, joined, or associated at least.
And should we do that with explicit trees of dependencies between tracks, or should we do that with priorities?
Well, that's effectively the priorities. The priorities are scoped to an emission, which is to say that these tracks are prioritized against each other. Yeah, I would do it based on priorities. That's delivery order. But that was always the intention. Delivery order is scoped to
because I mean the problem is that if you want to say, for example, that object 19 on this audio track is synchronized with object 43 on the video track, we can bring in a lot of complexity in the transport.
I'm not sure if they're synchronized per se, but you do need to tell a relay what it should drop. And that drop decision should be, you know, it should depend on the tracks, as in you drop this object in favor of this object on a different track.
I mean,
yeah, basically what Alan's saying is the mission's just a prioritization domain.
yes. Okay. Yes, I mean, I think we should definitely dig further into that.
And,
yes.
I think my question, in some ways, oddly follows up a little bit on Luke's here, and it's more an observation about this layered track. So, look, clearly, I think the relay needs to understand what it drops is the right way of thinking about these two different tracks when we're talking about audio and video, and it seems like priorities are a very direct way to do that. But when we get to a layered codec, there's two decision design paths we could go down here, right? We could put them in one track, or we could put the two different layers in two tracks. And either way, the relay is going to have enough information to understand that it should drop the high quality or the higher quality track before the lower quality track, right? And I think it's all right if layered codecs are a little bit more complicated for the application to deal with. So I could certainly see that we could easily do this as the adaptation layer was a separate track, and the relays didn't really need to know any more than they know that audio or video are connected. They just know the priorities for this thing. That it's that all the complexity of collecting those two layers together was handled by the manifest or was sort of application knowledge. The relays just knew that it had these two different tracks with different sort of priorities for how they dropped and delivered them. So that'd be one design. I think the other design would obviously be to put them in the same, but now if we put the layered codec, the two layers in the same track, then we definitely have to be putting enough information on each object that it understands the priorities of those objects, and the relays knows which of those objects to drop inside of the track. And it also makes it a little bit harder for a client to sort of say something like, I only want the low bitrate version. I only want the low bitrate layer. I don't want to receive the high bitrate layer. And at the point where you're receiving the low bit rate layer and you want to temporarily try the high bit rate layer and then go back again, I don't know. So I think that it would be pretty easy to map out there's really only two designs. There's only, we have to go A or B. There's no other designs that are going to work here. It's either and map those out and see what they both look like. Do you have thoughts on sort of, which one of those would be the best design direction?
I do think that we need to have a specific effort on layered codecs to understand what's happening. The problem, I think we discussed that in Seattle as well, is that layered codec are layered in two dimensions. They are layered in time and they are layered in space. And then you have a rich set of dependencies. For example, if you are layered in time, you could have, say, the 15 frames per second objects and the 30 frames per second object and the 60 frames per second objects. And you have to say, okay, if I decode a 60 frame per second object, can I do that without having seen the 15 and 30 frames per second object that came before? And so maybe not, I don't know. I mean, but you have to decide that. The other kind of decision that you have to make is, okay, suppose that at some point in the group, I decide that I have to drop the 60 frames per second object. Does that mean that I'm going to drop everything until the end of the group? Every of those objects, because, I mean, there are unknown dependencies between those things? Or do I have some kind of a reset point somewhere later? Now, that's just one dimension. If you take the spatial encoding, you can have, say, the 720p object, and then the 1080p object, and then the 4K object. And those combine with the separation in time. And at that point, drawing the graph of dependencies can be a little bit challenging. So it's probably doable. I mean, we do these kind of things all the time, but I think that we should have a specific challenge. Says, okay, suppose a codec that's something like that combine temporal dependencies and spatial dependencies. How do we organize it? Is it easier to organize that with several tracks? Is it easier to organize that as a single track with metadata linking the object? I mean, the single track has the advantage that you will get a single sequence number for the object that gives you an implicit delivery order. But I think at that point, the discussion I've seen on GitHub are a bit exploratory, and we should have probably a focused discussion on that.
Okay, so just to let you know, we have 3 more people in queue and only 10 minutes. So I think having a focused discussion on this does seem like a useful outcome here. Would the note taker please note that an action item to the chair is to identify that group? Thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Thanks, Christian, for putting the slides together. I have a few observations and probably a few confusions that I would like to get clarification to the group, which is when we talk about objects, I think we are talking about objects in different granularity. And that's been source of confusion on what it means in terms of encryption context, what it means in terms of prioritization context, and how it can be fair between objects of different sizes. If everything is put in some order of priority. And also on the previous discussion about 30 frames per second objects or 60 frames per second object, my thinking here is that we are talking object as an output of an encoding, like an encoder frame at certain quality and certain temporal dependency. That's kind of my definition of an object is. I just want to make sure if that kind of aligns with what you're thinking. That's basically the proposition 1 slide, if I'm not wrong. And second thing is that on the we can go one by one, but second thing is on the groups, as I agree with what Mo and Will said, they being synchronization points and also having stateless. That way it's easy to kind of go from one group to another group in a way that's an application. The relays may not have to understand everything about an application is. And the last one about the layer coding is, I know we are discussing about this separately, but one point I would like to say is that, like, if you look at anything like latest codecs like AV1, they have this huge dependency descriptors that identify how various frames across different layer and temporal scalability depend. And that structure is sent as an RTP header extension or as an video object payload, and we need to kind of turn around this layered encoding and think about what the receiver is asking about. Can the receiver basically ask that he would want a particular what we call in AV1 terminology a decode target, which is like a combination of spatial and layered capacity, saying that I would like to just get VGA at 15 FPS. How is that kind of answered? Just looking at the publisher side, we miss the picture on the receiver side, and hence we need to start looking at what does it mean, and should it make sense to push this complexity to the application layer and keep the relays as simple as possible, which is you get set of data you want to forward based on subscriptions. And that would make the transport definition much smaller and easier. And last point I had was on the track identifiers. I think making the track identifiers something as an URL would make MOQ just worry about tracks and leave the rest of things to application on what it means to put it in emission or and broadcast and or a composition and what properties that brings along with by putting things together.
Yes, I think that a lot of what you said there falls back into this initiative we have to have on how exactly do we deal with layered encoding. And yes, you could have a complete dependency graph saying that, oh, in my group, object 10 depends on object 9 and 7 and 4 and 2 and 1. And if any of those is not arrived yet, there is no point. We could say that. We could say that, have a list of dependencies and carry that in the header. As you say, that makes relaying more complex because, I mean, relay have to be worried about that graph and get an implicit order, etc., etc. We may be able to simplify by using the ordering of objects in a group to have a comparison operation instead of just, individual dependencies. I am concerned that HTTP 2 went into that path of having a very complex graph of dependencies and presentation orders. And then they have to walk it back because nobody could implement it properly. So there is a point of trying to get to the right level of complexity. So I'll say, let's have this discussion on layered encoding, go into the concrete details on how we do that, what that implies, and then we can see it. Victor?
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to comment on Proposition 2, specifically the issue of tracks being related. So there are two, when doing a live stream, there are often two priorities, that is two kind of things, two goals we want to simultaneously achieve. One is we want to prioritize audio over video generally, and the second is we want to prioritize new content over old content. And the problem here is, well, how do we combine those priorities? Do we always prioritize new audio and old audio over new video and old video? And the answer is you usually want new videos and new audios and old new audios and new videos and old audios and old video. But the problem here is that in order to do that, you have to have some shared timing model between those two. Since you generally want newer audio before. The catch here is you want to prioritize new video over old audio, and in order to do this kind of prioritization, since you don't care about, in order to do this kind of prioritization, they need to be synchronized. Since this doesn't make sense between two sources which are not synchronized, but you can do that within sources which are synchronized. And that is where roughly the concept of, and this is roughly the reason why a transport would need to know about things more than individual tracks, from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what you propose is something like we discussed that I think before. Is if tracks are part of a bundle, force them to have the same structure of groups, or something of that nature. So we can say that, okay, if we go fast forward to group 10 on video, we should also go fast forward to group 10 on audio. That's something like that. Is that what you have in mind?
Well, it's not just that. It's like if I have a player buffer of 10 seconds, I want to only have 10 seconds of video and audio because I don't care anything in the past. But of course, that kind of buffer, that kind of time control is per clock source, not per track or per multiple independent tracks which don't share a clock source.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, I hear you. I must say that I am concerned about the extra complexity of having synchronization point between tracks, and that in practice, it may be that sending the audio fast enough is good enough, but so basically that's another very concrete point that you want to discuss. Suppose that I have an audio track and a video track. How do I synchronize them, and do I need to have the synchronization inside the transport? That's, I think that's the second question after the layered encodings. Jordi?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted, so thanks for the presentation. Really very helpful because following all all those PRs was a bit of a hassle, but thanks for putting that together. So I just wanted to touch on the concept of groups, just for my understanding. So it seems that that we are saying that the groups is a group of objects that belongs to the same track, that they start with a tap, with an access point, let's say, they are decodable from the beginning, and they are also have monotonically increasing IDs. Okay, so basically, if the group always starts with a decodable access point, and the objects are identified also with monotonically increasing IDs, why do we need groups? So what groups give us? Because we can just put a flag in an object that it's since the objects are sequenced, because they have a monotonically increasing sequence ID. If we put a flag in the object that says, okay, this object is a tap, then what extra features the groups will give us?
I think that what you're describing there is something which is about the concrete representation in the protocol. I did not want to go into the concrete representation of protocol right now. When you could indeed do that, things that are based on flags are typically less robust than things that are based on hierarchy. I mean, the classic problem with flags is that if you do miss the object that carried the flag, you don't know that the object that comes next is on a new group or on the previous group.
Yes, but in this particular,
so it's really a question of basically encoding and the robustness of the transport and things like that.
Yeah, but in this particular use case, it seems that it's perfectly okay, because if we miss the object with the flag, so with the tap, then we don't care if the rest of the group belongs to the previous or the next one. Since it's not decodable, we need to wait to the next tap.
Yeah, but that means that you will need to have an indication in the subsequent object that they refer to this previous start access point, and that's kind of the same thing as having a group. I think there is no practical difference. It's just an encoding issue.
Okay, I'm still not convinced, but yeah, definitely groups concept will work too. So it's not a matter of okay. It's not a strong opinion. So thank you.
And Bernard.
I just wanted to comment on the layered coding problem. It matters a great deal whether it's sender driven or receiver driven, because in the sender case, it has information on all the layers, whereas in the receiver case, the receiver will only have information on the layers it is receiving. And that makes a huge difference because a receiver that's only receiving a lower layer won't know the upswitch point unless they're encoded in the layers that it's receiving. So you need to know whether you have a sender-driven architecture or receiver-driven.
Yes, and I think that we are pretty much in a cell-driven model, if only because we envisage relays doing fan out. And if you have relays doing fan out, I mean, a receiver can only control something locally at the end of its fan out branch, and only the sender has a global view. But
Right.
what we have heard from you, but also I believe from, I think it was Cullen, is that we can have a case in which a receiver, when they subscribe to an object, say, just give me the first layers because I don't need to have the full definition. So there is this notion there that a user can say, yeah, I know it's that object will be all the way to 4K 60 frames per second, but I am interested in 720p at 30 frames per second. I don't want to have all those extra layers. That's something that we may need to have an affordance in the protocol.
Yeah, it doesn't take into account decodability, but that's something a server can know.
Well, the decodability is expressed in the dependencies between frames,
right,
so that you understand what you have.
Anyway, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a little bit confused because we locked the queue, and somehow you moved into the locked queue. So that was a neat trick, and you can have the floor briefly if you'll tell us how you did it.
I wish I knew.
Okay.
I've joined the conference about 4 times because I'm getting kicked out like Ollie is too, I think. So maybe that's to do with it.
Okay.
Just very quickly, I think on groups, I think it's relevant to consider them directly in the protocol because people have been assuming that groups are addressable. We've always talked about objects being addressable, but I think really more likely the groups are the most addressable things, and entities are subscribing for or grabbing the groups, not the individual objects.
Okay, so I think we did go ahead and close the queue. Tim, I'm sorry, you joined after the queue is closed, and I think we're running a little bit behind now. In terms of action items, I think we've made some progress today, and I think what we're going to ask the folks working on this to do is to go back through the chat, because I think we're still looking for agreement on the properties of objects, groups, and now that thing which might be above track. And I think that there was some emerging agreement in the chat, in particular about the relationship between the application selected decodability or encoder behavior and its relationship to each one of those. And so that might be the way that we can approach this next, is to say, okay, assign them a letter and say, A represents this relationship to the encoder's presumption of behavior by the decoder and by the relay. And I think that might help us when we come to Yokohama. I do think that there's a lot of valuable stuff on these slides, and I think the conversation has been very useful. Thank you very much. But I think there's still a bit left to do. The other thing that's going to be related to that is this group that Kristen, you mentioned we needed to sit down for a while and talk about the specifics of what this all means for layered encodings. because as you say, the dependency for layered encodings look a little bit different. And especially if you're going to want these things that sit above the tracks to be able to express dependencies across these, and for that to be true for layered encodings, it's going to be quite complicated. So if you are interested in being part of the group that sits down to do that, please send Alan and me a note, and we will help get everybody who volunteers together. Christian, don't bother sending us a note. You're drafted.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Alan, who's next? Who's the next presenter?
I think Spencer. So I'm going to switch the slides out. I'm going to try. There we go. Share slides, intermediaries. All right. Spencer, you got it?
I think so.
Let me pass control to you.
Okay, excellent. So thank you. So this is a progress report from the intermediaries design team. And that was formed after the January interim meeting. And this is not to say that, you know, we've discussed things, but this is not to say that we all agree on everything that's in this slide deck. And just a call out to the design team members here and ask that if there are things that I'm getting wrong, please feel free to dive into the queue and help the working group understand what I meant to say. And do I? Yeah, okay. And so basically, background for this session, great quote from Luke. Like Ted mentioned, we've all got our own preconceived notions of how media is supposed to work over the last 30 years. We need to step back and really explore the different roles, why they exist, and what data they need to function. We'll be able to justify any messages and their contents once we can map out how data needs to flow. So I thought that was a great quote, and it made me think a little bit. Because we work on some similar but not identical media use cases, we use ideas that have similar but not identical meanings across use cases. And just like I say, reminding people, the intermediaries design team has been working on figuring out what a group of 6 people can agree to. Obviously, it will be interesting to see what a larger group can agree to as things go along. So one of the things we were talking about, so one of the ways we got started was basically saying, well, what are the roles? And if our intention is to describe what relays are doing, let's talk about what relays are not doing, just so that we understand what's already being handled somewhere else in the MOQ universe before you involve relays. Yeah. So we were working for most of the time that we've been talking. We've been working with a model where we had publishers and subscribers and what we were calling media sources and media sinks. And we've had some discussions starting last Friday with 2 or 3 more roles, and I could say something about that, or somebody else can. But like I said, I'm just talking about what the design team has been talking about, so that basically publishers are providing publish requests, catalog messages, and object messages. I understood from the discussion during Christian's presentation that not everything comes from the publisher directly, if I got that correctly. But so like I said, we've got things to think about, especially after we've heard what other people are saying, and that subscribers handle the other side of that, basically, providing subscribe requests, consuming catalog messages, and consuming object messages. And then the media source was generating media content, encoding it possibly, and encrypting it possibly. And the media sync would be doing the same thing that the media source did in reverse order. Like I say, I think this is probably a good, this is a good place for me to just mention the other ideas we've been suddenly talking about in the design team. One was about an entity that creates catalogs or creates a composite of catalogs. And then we have some discussion about a definition for something called an emitter and receiver, and we are trying to understand the relationship between that pair of roles and media source and media sync. I'm not sure if that's just a terminology switch or if there's something more involved there. But like I said, that's something we're still trying to figure out. So that takes us to, and like I say, this is stuff we started out with from Will, but basically looking at what minimal distribution topologies would look like. And so this is if you don't have a relay and if you do. Then maybe a more interesting topology. Like I say, this is the one where we're showing like a full ingest and full, and distribution. Again, this was a figure, a diagram that was originally taken from Will and then discussed a bit and modified in a few places. So people may have seen something like that. The one thing that changed during our discussions was thinking about what it means to be an origin and potentially a back-to-back subscriber publisher. And there may be some more. There may be some more nuances in what an origin is, but this is what we've been talking about so far. So, and this is actually another Will diagram that we had modified a bit to try and explain what the different roles are between media sources and media syncs, and then what relays and what origins actually look like there a bit. So, we've got, again, starting at the top, you've got a MOQ endpoint publishing directly to a MOQ endpoint, and then with a relay in between the two endpoints, and then two endpoints publishing media to a device that mixes them together. And we're still talking a bit about terminology, whether what exactly it means to be a media mixer, for instance. And then 2 endpoints having a web conference through a relay where each endpoint may have all of the roles, publisher, subscriber, media source, and media sync. And then a publisher streaming a game through a CDN to a client where there's just a cascade of relays. So that one, and let's see. So do people have these ideas somewhat firmly absorbed where we can talk about more details? I'll stop for 30 seconds and see if anybody wants to get in queue. I will.
Hey, Spencer, thanks for putting all this up. Just a quick comment as we're looking at this. The diagram here for 2 endpoints having a web conference or a relay, both endpoints would be publishing and subscribing. The diagram shown there is it's the one on the left is publishing and the one on the right is subscribing. We'd actually need 2 lines, right? They should both be publishing and both subscribing. It's
yeah.
It means rejiggering the image, but in case that was confusing anybody, there would be double side to that.
Right. And thank you. So I think one of the things that I told the design team I hope we push down more on is basically, we kind of have an understanding from about some of the lines, but making sure that we have all the lines. Because these, as you see, these pictures don't include the lines for the media flow. This is basically kind of the relationship on publish, subscribe. But yes, hi Tim.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. A couple of comments. Sorry, and I hear myself echo, which is quite annoying. First one is we have streams that go to the relay. The endpoints will do a publish request and hopefully a subscribe. The publish request namespace is most likely more specific of the subscribe. So we want to make sure that we don't send data back to the publisher. Now, how I'm doing that today is tracking the publish request flow stream or flow ID of some kind that says that was where the subscribe also came from, and then we'll not send it back. So I feel like we need to have some standard for handling that, especially in the case of multiple streams, and being symmetric with their publishing.
Excellent. And I see that the note takers are typing away on that point. And thank you for that, note takers. And just for anybody that's in the conference, if you keep an eye on what the notes say to make sure that you were captured correctly, we'll probably all be happier. So Alan?
Yeah, I have one question on this slide. On the right-hand side where it says mock origin, and it has the 4 boxes.
Yeah.
I understand that in the picture there are some origins that have 4 boxes, but I'm not sure why every origin would need to be for a subscriber, for example, or a sync.
I appreciate that comment, and I would be tempted to hide behind the title which says various use cases, but not every possible use case. But I really, like I say, I really do appreciate the observation and the opportunity for us to clarify that. Thank you. Suhas.
Yep. Thanks, Spencer. And I agree with Alan. Not every origin required to be a media source and a media sink. In many cases, it's the opposite of that, where we don't want origins to be involved in any end-to-end encrypted flows to access the raw payload. It's more like in webex.com, it does not look into media that's going through that. So it's in those cases only the endpoints or the one that should have access to the end-to-end encryption key. And if we look at these roles and their trust model and then apply them to the physical components that implement some of these roles in the architecture, then it becomes more clear. And some of the direction that you've been presenting would help go in that direction. Thanks.
Okay. Like I said, this is where we are now. This is not what all of us agree is the right answer forever. Cool. And nobody else in queue? Okay. So if we are all relatively synchronized here, let's move on a bit. And this might get livelier. So if we were looking at what MOQ endpoints do, and like I say, we ended up thinking about that so that we could say, this is what endpoints do, and so relays don't do it. So being the source or sink for media and being a publisher and being a subscriber, our idea was that those things happen at MOQ endpoints, and that these are things that the endpoints are trusted with. Keys to encrypt and decrypt the raw content if provided, and modifying or originating object headers and payloads, parsing and manipulating catalog messages and object messages, originating subscribe messages, and originating publish messages. I think it's, as I say, I think it's fair to say we are talking about a couple more concepts in the design team that might affect what the definitions of an endpoint are. But this is what we seem to be landing on so far as of today. Comments or questions? Hi, Ted.
So I guess this is a comment on the what am I trusted with. I think we will see classes of endpoints here, and that in some of those cases that some classes of endpoints won't be trusted with all of these capabilities. So as long as we think of this as the set from which the rules and trusts are drawn, rather than presuming that it's always going to be the case that all of them have this, I think we're probably good to go. But I just wanted to call it out in particular because there are going to be some kinds of sessions in the real-time case where of nodes might be able to both originate subscribe messages and originate publish messages, and a different set of nodes might be only able to originate subscribe messages.
Right. And so I appreciate that clarification. And I think there was also an implicit clarification, which was that you would be able to select things that endpoints do, and in order to describe a class of endpoints, and that would actually be a helpful thing for us to provide for people who are trying to deploy MOQ in their systems. So thank you for that. I'm just I'm just looking at the notes. So I was hearing that they are having different trust levels, but also that the endpoints will, not all endpoints will do everything that an endpoint can do. Cool, thank you. And so if I go on to slide 8, these were the examples of mock endpoints that we had, which I think that may be starting to head towards the suggestion that Ted raised. And so, we're publishing a stream, or we are a web conference client, which may have a lot of things going back and forth. But also, 3 of our examples were for middle box functionality, which we were, if you look back at, if you're looking back at slide 5, which I just flipped to, that basically, we're talking about combining things into a back-to-back endpoint, if that's a reasonable back-to-back mock endpoint, if that's a reasonable way to describe things, and that different functionalities may be put in back-to-back endpoints as we're going along. So yeah. So like I said, just thinking in terms of transmuxers, as I'm picking out different rates and things like that. If transcoders as something where I say I really need to be able to decode the actual media and encode it using a different stream type, that would something that would happen in a middle box, and something that would do composition would be something that would happen in a middle box. And this is mostly to pull these things out of the functionality that we're thinking of for relays. Any questions there? Hi, Tim.
Sorry, I have to allow audio every time.
I can hear you now.
Do you guys hear me double, or is it just one?
I'm sorry?
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me twice.
I'm only hearing you once.
Okay. All right, so on the relays and the subscribers and the media devices in the middle, there's a use case that I've been running up against, which is finding the nearest X number of receivers of a pool that should receive that data. So if it's in the West Coast versus East Coast, I have 100 transcoders all subscribed to the same namespace. But I want the media with the relays to go to only 2, which are the nearest ones.
Okay.
So I'm looking at trying to solve that. I'm not sure if that's in here or not.
I can tell you that I don't believe the design team has talked about that yet. And just speaking completely for myself, I think one of the things that is happening is that we are tripping over maybe not use cases at the level of the use cases that are mentioned in the charter, but additional use cases that have specific characteristics that other use cases don't have, and specific characteristics that might affect the design of the protocol. So what you just mentioned is a really good thing for us to put in the use cases part of the requirement document. And
Yeah,
actually,
it kind of needs to be on the subscribe. You have to basically say, how many do you want to receive the stream? And then if it fails, there has to be some chain of failover. But yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing we are figuring out as we're going along is exactly what the responsibilities, division of responsibilities is between the application and the MOQ protocol. You know, basically how much does a MOQ implementation do for you? So like I said, I'm nodding my head up and down there. Yes.
I do feel like this is a relay function though, but
yeah.
Okay.
And cool. So thank you for that. And so finally, talking about relays, we talked about them as if they were publisher subscribers. And they may look that, so this is Spencer freewheeling here a moment. They may look like that to the rest of the system, but they might or might not be originating subscription and publication requests or information. They may be relaying it. So what we are trusted to do to modify an object header, to forward subscriptions to other entities, to forward the publishes to match subscribers, to store the published content, which is, we'll talk about more, I'm sure, to validate authorization credentials for published subscribe requests. And I've had a question in my mind about how involved origins are in authorization, and I think this conversations we're having here have been very helpful for me with that as well. So no questions on this slide. Then let me go to the next slide. Things that MOQ relays are not trusted with. And the design team has talked about this a bit less, but this list has been out there in our shared space for pretty much the whole time we've been a design team. Not parsing catalog messages, not parsing object message payloads, not originating subscribe messages, and not originating publish messages. I should stop there for questions on that one. Hi, Alan.
Good morning, Spencer. Question about originating subscribe messages. So I imagine if you have a relay where you're waiting for a consumer or subscriber to show up, issue a subscribe, then a relay can subscribe on their behalf to an upstream, for example. But it also seems like you might want to have relays that are pre-subscribed to certain things, which you anticipate subscriptions for. So is that something that is allowed, or does it just not fit into this particular taxonomy of relay?
So I think I would answer that to say it doesn't fit into this taxonomy yet. But one of the things that I think we also have to do to move ahead and make progress here is to figure out what what is actually relay functionality and what is actually back-to-back endpoint functionality. And that may be a bit more obvious on the next slide. Does that work for you, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit. Like, we have a formal definition of this is a relay, but if you don't fit into it, at any point you can be like, well, I'm not a relay. I'm two endpoints back to back, which means none of the rules apply to me anymore. Are we okay with that? Or I guess another way is like, why are we specifying what a relay can do if there's such an easy way to sort of like, I think maybe it's more like, what is a relay required to do? Is easier.
Yes, exactly. So a thing we have been talking about is what's the definition of minimal relay functionality. So that, exactly what we're saying, which is if I tell you that I'm a relay, can I actually forward anything? So I mean, that's like basics, right? But if I tell you that I'm a relay, what other things can I do? And that's actually the next slide. So please be ready to jump back into queue for that. Suhas? Not hearing you quite yet.
Sorry.
Okay, I think you're there. Yeah. Okay.
I agree with Alan's concern there. I think we need to take a step back and think about there are roles like a publisher role and relay role. Sorry, publisher role and a subscriber role, and there is a physical or virtual entity that's sitting in somewhere that's performing. That's called a MOQ relay. And we need to basically say what roles that apply to MOQ relay, and on both publisher and subscriber role would apply to MOQ relay. That means that they can subscribe on behalf or publish on behalf of the previous relay or the previous client that connected to that MOQ relay. And when we kind of take these roles as separate thing and then apply to these boxes like the MOQ relays or MOQ endpoints or a transcoder or something, then we can basically say the roles define the functionalities that that a relay could do. And I would strongly think like encourage us not to think about the core minimal relay functionality and maximal relay functionality. To keep it simple, I would just say relay is anything that does publisher role, a subscriber role, and it does not have access to end-to-end encrypted keys. Anything beyond that should have a new name, not some special form of relay. Thanks.
So many good points that Suhas just brought up there. I agree that, so you said step back. I would say step sideways to step forward. That for us to push down to the next layer, the next level of what we've been talking about and saying, much like Alan was asking, if does this taxonomy do what we need it to do? And if it doesn't, what do we need to change in order to be able to do what we need to do? So definitely agree on that. We're also talking about the definition of, we're also talking about the definition of what's a relay and what's a back-to-back MOQ endpoint. And I think, like I say, I think the next slide actually helps us guide that conversation a little bit. But we've been having a spirited conversation among the design team members within the last 24 hours on that. So I know there's more work to do. but I'm liking what Suhas said. Thank you for that. Tim. Tim, are you able to go? Are you able to turn your audio on?
Audio.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, cool.
I had to rejoin.
Excellent.
I was just going to quickly add a use case for the reason why a publisher or a relay may need to originate a published message. And that reason is with fragmentation and double fragmentation, if we allow that. So if I have a transmitter publishing at 9,000 MTU, my messages will be larger in datagram messages.
Mm-hmm.
And then there will be fragments within that. The relay is going to receive that, pass it around, providing it the MTU around with all the other relays is 9,000. But then I have all these subscribers that have different MTU sizes. So if we handle mixed MTU, that will require relays to repack and refragment, which technically is a new published message.
Yeah. So you see the tension between even the first slide I had about this and the second slide I had about this, where our relays publishing and subscribing, or are they forwarding publish subscribe messages? So I think what you're talking about there is in the same category, which is something that and we'll keep calling it a relay because that's what the slides say now. Something that a relay might do in order to transform the messaging, in order to accomplish something that the subscriber needs to have happen, whether that's dealing with MTU fragmentation, or whether that's some more things. Like I say, we should be talking, but I'm leaning now in the direction of relays being able to subscribe on their own behalf and publish on their own behalf. And I'll probably say more about that on the next slide. Hi, Will.
Hey, Spencer. I was here to answer Alan's original question, but I also want to answer Tim's and yours. Relays can't subscribe on their own behalf because look at what they're not trusted with, passing catalog messages. The catalogs define the subscription IDs. So relays don't know what to subscribe to because they're not trusted with reading the catalogs. They are simple components. They're given instructions and they follow the rules. If they're asked to do more than that, then by this taxonomy, they're not a relay anymore. So I think per Alan's question, if you want to pull content to the edge of your relay, the relay can't do it because it doesn't know what to pull. You have to give it a message through your command system or through your pull to the edge system that would instruct the relay what to subscribe to. And then it'll be there in advance of your true clients. But I don't think we should break the model here that a relay is the simple component, because that's the one that we can really scale up. If it has to understand catalogs, then we have to constantly update the relays every time there's a new behavior. We don't want that. We want a reliable, simple thing.
Right. So you are pinging me about a number of reasons why we have minimal relay functionality. So cool. Thank you for that, Will. Suhas? You able to unmute Suhas? There we go.
Clarification, or asking for to what Will said. I think a relay should definitely be able to forward a subscribe to down. I think, I don't know if we are capturing that or not, forwarding per subscribe or publish, because if relay does not have the content, it has to forward it somewhere towards the origin, like what Christian was talking about, and that needs to be captured. Probably we need to basically add that as what it can do. That should be the minimal functionality it should be supporting.
You guys are working so hard to get me to the next slide, but I haven't done that yet. But you're working hard to do that. Tim.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how we possibly subscribes without other relays thinking direct members, unless we change the subscribe completely to include that this is relayed from.
Tim, you are suddenly breaking up, and you have not been. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And when you just said that, I could hear you clearly. Could
Okay,
you just
I was
repeat
just
what
saying,
you said?
I was just saying that if we forward subscribes, that will inadvertently cause the other relays to think that they have direct subscribers and that it's an edge, which is not true. So now we're maintaining a peering tree or a mesh of relays of all the subscriptions that are aggregated with next hops going to other relays. And now we have a forwarded subscribe from a direct source. That's going to get a little messy.
Like I said, you'll notice that what we're talking about here is not in a document yet, because I don't think we're through. Suhas, could I ask you to take a look at the notes? It looks like your last comment may have been missed, and I was agreeing with 2 or 3 different things you said. So please check and make sure that the notes include what I was agreeing with.
Sure, I'll do that. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you. So I don't have anybody else in queue, so let's go to what mock relays do. So the the prime directive for relays that I've gotten is that they're doing things that do not require access to unencrypted media payloads. And that's what I've been working with in my mind for a while. And then in conversations with Will in the last 36 hours or something like that, he was also mentioning the thing about not wanting to have everything in the universe that's able to see unencrypted media metadata. So that's actually, like I say, that's actually more restricted than the model I had been using in my mind. And I'm still processing through what the implications of agreeing with Will, which I want to do, what those implications are. But just going down the list that we've been working with, we said, so replication, a word that basically says I'm subscribing to one broadcast and I'm replicating the same broadcast to a potentially one subscriber. And fan out, when you are replicating one broadcast to multiple subscribers. That seemed to me to be kind of minimal relay functionality, but stay tuned. So again, in conversations we've had in the last 24 hours in the design team, thinking about hop by hop reliability and up to some level of reliability, basically saying if we're doing fan out, the relay is going to have information that is going to multiple places, and to make sure that for some level of reliability, it gets to the multiple places, which may have different path characteristics. So in my mind, after the conversation we've had in the last 24 hours, I think that hop by hop reliability is potentially part of minimal relay functionality. After conversations with Will, I understand more clearly that hanging on to information to do hop by hop reliability is not touching the same thing as hanging on to information to do caching functionality for reliability, for rewind, replay. Basically, once you've decided to cache, how much you cache and what you can do with that amount of media information is going to be kind of up to the network designers. And let me say the last thing, and then we can just go crazy. This is my last slide. But we've been talking about rate adaptation, and that had made it onto my list of what relays do, because we got this item in the MOQ charter where we're saying one of the things that the working group is doing, and actually the common protocol for publishing media for ingest and subscription will support, quote, or colon, and skip down about 3, and it says rate adaptation strategies based on changing codec rates, changing chosen media encoding qualities, and other mechanisms. What I've gotten is that is not minimal relay functionality, that is actually not even relay functionality, that is something that's going to be a lot more, quickly going to turn into back-to-back endpoint functionality. And at that point, that is my last slide. So I think that I should open the floor for questions. And Ted, how much time do we need to spend? How much time do you need? When do you need me to quit talking?
Well, because we have some elasticity in the issues resolution, let's take the questions now, if there are questions on this presentation, and we'll see how it goes. We are a little bit over time, but not as badly over time as we were before. You had a fair amount that came in during the presentation, so hopefully we can
cool. Yeah.
Clear now.
And thank you for that. And it's probably worth saying, this has been very helpful for me, and I hope for the other design team members to flesh out the next work we need to do. So we may not have to agree on things on this call in order to agree on things in Yokohama. Questions? Comments? Alan?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe highlight something that a question that I had that, and Will and I were discussing in the chat. So, which is about this idea of preceding content. So, what he said there, I think, makes a lot of sense, which is that most streams like this are not of interest, and there's no way a third-party CDN could handle preceding all of them, and that makes a lot of sense. Although I wonder if we would still want to allow something like a publisher can contact a relay and say, I would like to precede this to you as part of the I don't know, would that be part of like the web transport URL it connects to or something? And like, it's waiting to say like, is it okay? Can I send you this broadcast? And then a relay can say, no, I don't want you to do that. And then, you know, but some are pre-authorized. Or maybe this is solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved. Just like whatever, the additional preceding is not that important, or for the cases that it is, it's okay to not have a standard for it. That's all.
So I can't speak to how badly we need to standardize a way to do preceding, but it seems like to me that what we're talking about there is where it's helpful for caches to be doing something like this, because, you know, if the point of a relay is to forward things on behalf of things on one side of it to things on the other side of it, if that's the definition of a relay, then we can, you know, we can do a lot if we're, you know, so if this picture here was used for preceding, if does that make sense? You know, imagine that there's content coming in from the left, and that this thing in the middle subscribes to it, and down, you know, it basically gets that content and puts it in a cache, so that when requests come in from the right, you don't have to go past this box, this clump of functionality to provide that content. Is that kind of what you're talking about there, Alan?
Yes, and I think both Luke and Ted pointed out that this is a fairly complicated problem that probably isn't the one we need to solve, at least right now. So I think I'll just back off.
I respect your desires. The thing I would hope is that we, if we don't solve it now, at least we don't break it now, so that we can never solve it in the future. Martin, how was your day?
It's a good morning. Thanks, Spencer. I'm having trouble reasoning about this relay because I guess I don't understand the end-to-end encryption relationships, and I wonder if this is in scope of this work. Like if, for instance, each publisher has a one-to-one encryption relationship with, in terms of content encryption, with the subscriber, then relays have no point, right? Because because there's no content scaling. Like, I mean, every like individual byte stream has to come from the origin. So clearly, it's not what we mean. So how does this work? Do all subscriptions have to eventually go up? If the relays can't know about the content encryption, then to what extent does everything need to go back to the origin to go issue keys and all that stuff? And I don't know. It's maybe not a question for you, Spencer, but for the group, is this in scope, or does does everyone know the answer to this except me already?
So let's give Martin a second to record his own question. But I'll be inviting Will to talk next, and oh, he's still typing. He's still typing. Do it, guy.
Go ahead. I got it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Will.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer Martin's question. It makes a good point. If it's a one-to-one encryption, right, then actually the publisher must talk directly to the subscriber. Why do you need relays in the way? So the case where you might want relays is if your publisher is very far from your subscriber. Say you have a publisher in Miami on a bad internet connection, and the subscriber is in Seattle. you can route that traffic over FTP and over 10 different ASs, which will happen if you connect directly. Or the Miami subscriber would connect to a local relay, which is then connected over dedicated fiber to another relay because it's a CDN. So part of the purpose of the CDN is to offer midgress traffic that's higher quality than the general routing. So that would be a use case of putting relays in between, even if you've got a one-to-one encryption.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Will. And that is almost a quote of an exchange that we had on the design team probably within the last 18 hours. This meeting has been an excellent forcing function for helping the design team focus. James.
Good morning. Thanks for this. I want to also have a quick stab at answering Martin's question, but covering it, sort of expanding it a bit further. You're right that Will was right about the why would you do it when there's only if there's a one-to-one that you can then build networks that are shorter paths and all the rest of it. You can also do it for privacy measures such as obfuscating the sender or the publisher IP addresses from one another in the case of online telephony or whatever. But I think the vast majority of use cases where we will need to encrypt the media are one-to-many or many-to-many use cases, in which case this gets a lot more complicated, and actually it gets a bit more beneficial. And I think that there's two things that we need to work out here as a whole when we're talking about this sort of stuff. Is firstly that all the key exchanges and all the rest of that really needs to be kept outside of the protocol, and we just need to provide enough information so that the eventual media sync, I think is a language that the design team is using, knows how to do the key exchange, but the actual key exchange is an exercise left to the reader. And the other thing I think we need to work out is for each component that is in this chain, how do they authenticate to one another? And I think that if we get some clarity over those two pieces, we'll answer most, if not all, of the use cases where we need to talk about authentication, but also around management of encrypted media.
And thank you for providing that additional, focus on privacy as a benefit for having relays. So cool, thank you. Ted and Alan, I think at this point you can write our request for agenda time in Yokohama on the list that you're keeping. Suhas.
I'm basically echoing what James and Will talked about with another example, saying that in a conferencing scenario where you would like to have multiple people in a meeting, that would be the best use case. But there'll be scenarios where for one-on-one calls between Alice and Bob, you would still prefer going through relay because it does provide benefits of not having to do with peer-to-peer topology understanding and setting up the IEs, NAT, traversal, and those kind of things, because something in cloud, and that's kind of lets you kind of go from a meeting that can be scaled from one-to-one meeting to, say, one-to-many meeting. And in that in both the cases, it becomes natural to use one protocol to kind of support both. And in most of the cases that we are thinking about the MOQ, as James thought about, it's like for the media, it would be a symmetric encryption, and that would require either a DRM based something, a key that's been set sent to everyone, or it would be something more on the lines of an MLS keying that would happen outside the scope of the MOQ to set up the group key, and that gets typically used for the endpoints through the MLS exchanges and nothing to do with MOQ. And keeping those things separate would make the transport more specific to delivering encrypted media. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Ted. I'm seeing, yeah, there.
Starting to talk about key exchange, and in particular, whether the use case that Will was outlining was geographical in nature was important. And I just wanted to say, from a scope perspective, I don't think that I read the charter as limited to that. That end-to-end does not necessarily mean that it is encrypted from a single publisher to a single subscriber using a single key. And I think that the DRM cases and other cases people have raised are important to that. I think the key point to this, forgive the overloaded thing, is that my reading of our scope is that we're not trying to presume that the relays, especially the fan-out style relays, as opposed to the back-to-back user agents, have any access to the media. And that's important both from a privacy perspective, but also from a design perspective, because that means that anything they have to know about the media in order to do their jobs has to be in the transport metadata in some way. And I think from my perspective, the whole, yes, please, let's put the question of key management to the side. It's very hairy, and we've already got enough very hairy things to deal with. But the biggest thing that we have to do is assume that any one of these devices that's not acting as a client has no access to the media for the purposes of determining what we as the protocol designers need to put into the rest of the system. And that to me is the main point here, that scoping in the charter. And that's just what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Right, and you just Ted, you just nudged me to say something that I've been thinking, but I don't know that we've ever written down, which is the thing about what you have access to being transport level stuff versus the MOQ level stuff, basically the media level stuff that we've talked about. Putting anything that the relays, use that word, that the relays need to, in order to do their job as relays, putting, just copying that into a MOQ header that they would have access to and be able to understand. So it's not that they can read the media metadata. It's that we made a conscious decision to provide the media metadata to them, so some part of it to them, so that they can do their jobs. And I'm sure we could talk about that on the mailing list. Christian.
This is a comment on the graph that you have, the ingest and distribution topology. I think that this particular graph is only one way to represent the publishing process. And I see it myself in a very different way. I see the relay organized in some kind of cloud managed by the management of the relays. And the publisher function, basically, client may publish to a relay, and then the relay has to go to the origin for authorization and verification, but the data itself doesn't have to be.
Right.
The data itself is just effectively, you could think of having something like OSPF for the cloud saying, hey, I have this particular track URL available here.
Right.
And so I am a bit concerned there. And I think that we should clarify the relation between relay and origin, because there are fundamentally two kinds of relays: the relays that act on behalf of the client and the relays that act on behalf of the origin. In a classic CDN, the CDN has a contract with the publisher that entails what and how they will republish something that the publisher is providing. and that gives it a very specific relation. Like, for example, a relay that is part of that of that CDN with a contract with the publisher is going to interact with the origin based on that contract and says, yeah, please tell me if I can do this or not. A relay that is not going to interact with the origin that way. It might, but it has no basis, no shared contract, nothing like that. So we should also look at that.
Christian, I almost interrupted you in the middle of what you were saying to say that you were making a very profound comment that I'm making sure is in the minutes. I agree with that. That basically that I hope we don't end up with like 30 different special case relays, but that's a distinction that I definitely think is worth capturing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Tim?
Hi, yes. So I just wanted to add to the use cases for the relays, even in a point-to-point, even if it's one-on-one encryption, is that the relays do provide a consistent edge for communication between two or multiple clients. And at least from what we've been seeing at WebEx, it's been very challenging to get media to go through firewalls, through the customer infrastructure, and having consistent access to in-region resources has been a very big ask by many people, including like most of the European countries want to talk to only European. US folks want to talk to US only. We have various use cases that we need to pinhole things into certain areas, and it's very difficult when we have traditional signaling. So just want to highlight that that's a very useful use case to have the relays.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. And I think that the queue is closed and that there's nobody in it. So is it fair for me to ask the chairs to summarize what they think next steps here are?
So I think the next steps are we need to take the minutes of the meeting and review them and make sure that we have the points that were captured reflected in the documents, and that's the baseline here. I think I think we've made a good bit of progress in shared understanding, but I think we have to have it all written into the documents before we can kind of call it success. As you see at the moment, we're 26 people in the room, which is less than we had in Seattle and could be less than I expect in Yokohama. So we're definitely going to have to take this to the list as usual and go from there.
Yeah. Excellent. So just for me, please don't feel like you need to answer this question on the call, but when you say making sure things are getting in the documents, it seems like a lot of what I'm talking about here is relying on the terminology, relying on terminology that the intermediaries group has kind of been making up as they go along, and that we're talking about ideas that might reasonably go in an architecture draft. James and I before we started doing the design team discussions, James and I had assumed that we would be putting these things in the requirements document, in the use case of requirements document, because so many of the things we're talking about here are that the use cases and requirements descriptions would rely on those, would rely on these ideas and rely on these terms. But I don't know that that's the right place to put them. Do we want to spin up a architecture draft with a repo so that we could have this level of discussion without annoying the protocol team?
So I think that let me chat with Alan about that, and we'll try and figure out what home this needs. And I think there are two pieces to it. One is speed, right? I mean, the requirements draft is definitely further along than an architecture draft that we just started would be. And having this available now might be valuable, even if it later moved into a different document. So the good thing is we have the slides and we'll have the minutes and we can go from there.
Cool. Could I just ask, Ali, did I understand that you're working on a terminology draft?
Able to finish it up before this call. My apologies for that, but I'll try to sync up with you later this week or next week.
Okay, just suggesting that we make sure that we're communicating with you, just so that we're not writing a whole bunch of stuff that we have to rephrase later.
I was making some progress, and then a lot of things, new stuff has come in the last minute, so it got a little bit out of control. But we will get back on track.
Absolutely, perfect. Thank you. So we will communicate with you early and often. Thank you, Guy. And now I turn everything back to the host of.
I see Ted just rejoined, but it looked like he was offline for a minute. But thank you, Spencer, for that. And the next thing on our agenda was going through some issues. I didn't see anybody flag any particular issues on the list or via tags. So, and we have about 15 minutes where we could talk about them. So I'm going to go ahead and share the current issue list, but I guess I would solicit from the draft authors, and we'll look at the work draft first, if there's particular issues that you think getting clarity from this group of 26 people would help in adding information to provide an updated version of the draft that we will have for the draft deadline for Yokohama. Either jump in the queue and let me know which ones we should look at, or just paste them in the chat. And let me see if I can share my screen. The media slots are all taken. What's the trick for getting revoke slides? There you go. Do I really want to share my screen? Maybe not. Okay, it looks like it's being shared. These are the issues that are marked architectural. I don't see any of the draft authors in the queue. What should we do in terms of, do we want to review all of them? Okay, 66, relaxed catalog definition. Let me pull that up, and then Will, why don't you go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a good amount of commentary on this. You can scroll right down to the end, otherwise we'll get dizzy. But there has been some ideas. There's two basic, I think, fundamental things that were quite interesting came out. The first is that we can consider the catalog as another track. And this is interesting, right? A catalog, before it was a special entity or a document, and it then described tracks which themselves were different. But in this case, we can consider the catalog as just a track. It has a join point, which is an independent catalog, and then as new content becomes available in the broadcast or the package of content, so the catalog gets updated, and you can issue updates to it. And clients joining would want the latest version of the catalog. So I thought that was an interesting outcome from the discussion. The second point is, and you see it there, and Luke filed an issue on it after a proposal from myself, that we can actually merge a URL, the web transport URL. We can use it to carry information about the content that the client wishes to consume. In other words, the catalog definition. And we can either supply this as two pieces of data, or we can merge it into the one. And that, I think, is also a fundamental point that I would like us to discuss. And I have pictures of this that I can share if it's easier to debate that versus the text.
Okay, thanks, Will, for setting the stage. I don't see if anybody's jumped in the queue. Okay, here we go. Suhas.
I've been part of this discussion for a while, so I agree that catalog as treating, like going back to Christian's point about treating mawkish delivering tracks makes sense to treat catalog as another kind of track, and the same set of properties with groups that also falls really cleanly for catalog as well. And I would on the having the web transport URL also in having information about either the broadcast or the your URL or the track URL. That's something we should consider. And I would like to kind of take on from Christian's presentation on considering them as an URL and then how that maps into the web transport connection URL that we'll propose to the list. Thanks.
Luke, go ahead.
So I think the main thing worth discussing about catalog as a track is just what to do about updates. Hypothetical example, you've got like 100 tracks. Each track is like a different participant or something. And every time there's a track added or removed, is that a delta that you put on the catalog track, or is it a brand new independently decodable one? Like how frequently should you make independently decodable tracks, etc. Like I think we just need to discuss the whole how do you delta updates for tracks, and where do init segments fit into that. But I like the idea of having track 0 for sure being like a special. This is the catalog. This describes all the tracks within the emission/broadcast.
Okay, I put myself in the queue as an individual. I want to make sure I understand. Well, I guess one is for having the catalog be opaque, particularly so that it's very clear that relays aren't supposed to muck around with it, or are not required to muck around with it. That seems fine, but it seems like if we're going to start doing interoperability, we'll also need some kind of another document which defines some kind of catalog that says like, here are the tracks you can subscribe to. Otherwise, we're lacking some information about what we're going to need to do. So I think it's totally okay to have a base protocol where it says it's opaque, but I think that we'll also need to have some kind of placeholder, at least in the short term. And that would handle like the questions that Luke just raised. Is it appendable? Their delta encodings, like how does that work as a track? So that's one point. The other point I wanted to talk about is using the web transport URL for broadcast. And so we had a conversation earlier in this meeting about emissions, groups of tracks, and sort of an emission is a broadcast. So it just means that sounds like if we make the broadcast part of the web transport URL, then that means that web transport can only convey one emission. And I guess I think I saw some discussion on the list about that. So if we could maybe just highlight that part of the, like clarify the understanding there, or if we need to discuss more. And I'll jump out of the queue. Will's next.
Yeah, I wanted to answer firstly Luke's comment about how do we do delta updates on catalogs. I think if we follow the group construct that we followed earlier, then it fits quite naturally. In other words, you would issue independent catalogs. In other words, the full catalog as your group, and then you would do delta updates on it as your subgroup objects. And a new client joining, the relay would know I have to go back, find the last full group, and then give that plus all the delta updates from that to the client when they join, and then it could build up its fresh object model of the catalog. And in terms of best practice about how to update it, I think that's a function of how frequently it's changing. If you're in a web conference of 100 people, someone's changing every few seconds. You're going to do a bunch of small delta updates, right? You don't want to publish the whole 100-person list every second. But for a streaming sports game where there's one video, one audio, and it doesn't change in 4 hours, you would just publish it once, and then you'd have to issue a cache instruction to the relays to cache it for a long period of time, far longer than they probably would for the delta. So there's some correlation between how long we cache content and its anticipated change frequency. And then for the second function, I actually wanted to share a picture. Is there any way I can do that? Do I ask to share slides?
Let me see. I think I have to stop screen sharing, and then you can try to start, and then I can approve it, or we'll see if that works.
Okay, am I going to share the whole screen or just?
It'll ask you for a tab. Don't worry.
Okay.
Or
and maybe go to the next person. Yeah, I don't want the call to hang on me finding. So
Luke, you want to go ahead and ask your question while Will is trying to put a slide up?
Sure. I think the only other thing worth considering with the track 0, and somebody will run into this when they write it down, but how do you negotiate track formats or catalog formats? As in, I don't know, that negotiation, like what format do I use for the catalog needs to be somewhere. And that was part of the purpose of the catalog message, is that you could specify what format the catalog was in.
I forgot to answer that, Luke. That we have in the proposal like 3 different ways to specify the catalog type. And I was also talking with Suhas about if we have a catalog, right, and there could be many different types of catalogs. So we need some way to convey it. It's catalog number 6 and a registry of catalogs. And then we need a separate spec. So I was speaking with Suhas about we need to be writing a base spec that tells you how to write a catalog spec. And then people can go off and write catalog specs that interface cleanly with the base protocol.
Kind of assumes that it still kind of assumes that there's one catalog for a broadcast and it's of this type. I think at least for backwards compatibility, I would totally imagine like I could publish 2 types of catalogs, with the new format and the old format. And I don't think you can do that with this current proposal, but we'll leave it in the weeds. It's fine. It's the implementation detail.
Fair point.
Okay, so Luke, Will, I think I granted you permission to share.
You did. I'm just trying to find the right tab. I got like.
Okay. I just want to make sure that it wasn't on me. And then Suhas,
I'm working on it.
Clarify on some things that from Christian's presentation, I kind of felt that we are talking about catalog to be a composition, which can have tracks from multiple emitters, and that will also give a subset if an emission is all made up of from one emitter, then the catalog can map to an emission. I would like, I'm okay with either way, but we need to kind of make a conclusion, because that kind of goes back to the next question, which is what does a web transport session map to? There's been discussion that it maps to an emission versus a composition. And if you're thinking about a catalog as a scope, and if you say a catalog maps to a composition, then a web transport session would map to a composition. If the other way, on the flip side, it would map everything to emission. And maybe my reading of Christian's slide was wrong. I like to either get clarification on that one.
Okay, thanks, Suhas. Okay, Will, you want me to take Luke's question and I have a clarifying question also, or do you want to run through the slide first?
Well, this was the explanation for the combining the URL. So I thought it was easier with pictures. I can talk over this later. I don't want to inject myself.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Luke?
I was just going to say that everything's scoped to an emission. Like the catalog is for a single emission. The web transport session is for a single emission. If you want to receive compositions, which is different emissions from different sources over different possible links and different CDNs even, I just think that's out of the scope of the transport protocol.
I think and this as an individual, I think I have the same understanding, which is that composition may be coming from multiple different places, and that there's value in having a catalog which is scoped only to a single emission. It's like, these are the tracks that make up this emission. If we want to also have something that says, here is a description of what I want to show on my screen, which is actually emissions from a lot of different sources which can be coming from different CDNs, different links, that's fine, but that wouldn't necessarily be scoped to a web transport session or quick connection. So I think I'm just trying to, I don't think I'm being very clear about it, but I'm trying to agree with what Luke just said, that one web transport session for one emission, and there's one catalog which is also scoped to that emission. I think those are useful. And I noticed that Ted has locked the queue, and we're down to about a little bit less than 15 minutes. So we'll try to drain the queue here and then move on to just planning for our next meeting. Go ahead, Christian.
When I hear this discussion, I think it needs to be grounded in two issues, which are routing and authorization. Routing is that if the client is looking for some data, for some stream, it will do a connection maybe through a relay towards the origin of that stream. And so the web transport connection is definitely tied to a client and an origin. So if the client is looking at media from multiple origins, it will most probably use different connections because otherwise it might not be the most appropriate relay. So that's one thing. The other part is authorization. And we have to decide whether the authorization is performed at the level of the web transport connection or at the level of the individual track requests. When I hear that basically we have a group, emitters, etc., what is concrete there is the authorization issue. We could have a model in which the authorization is done per web transport. I mean, I do a web transport for the purpose of getting this kind of, this particular URL, emitter domain, whatever. And then we have all the authorization done at that level. I don't know whether that's what we want to do, but my point is that when we discuss that, we have to tie this addressing schema to routing towards the proper intermediate and to managing authorization. And that's it, yes.
Okay, I'm not sure that we have much time for you to go over this slide, but I know that it was sent to the list and there has been some discussion there. So does that sound right to you as well, Ted and Will, that we don't go into that right now?
Yeah, if you don't want me to talk over it, I won't, but as long as people know it's there and we can discuss it on the list, that's fine. But I think something like this should be discussed, and it would be good to get some airtime for it in Yokohama.
And that brings us to our next question, which is what needs airtime in Yokohama? So obviously, this is one request that we've gotten. I think we got one from Spencer earlier, and I think we're expecting an update based on today's conversation from the folks that were working on object models. Spencer, you're in queue. Okay, Spencer, tell me what you need.
Yeah. So I had just sent a email to the chair's copy of the working group about the requirements draft, and just suggesting that James and I do submit a -04 before the cutoff on Monday, and let you all start polling working group for adoption on that. So we didn't need to talk about anything today, except for me to say that out loud. But putting something in, putting something in Yokohama about providing an update for the working group on that, including any issues that are raised during the adoption poll. Thank you.
Okay. So yes, and thank you for the reminder to everybody about when the draft deadline is, because that will drive some of this. So if you are one of the folks who was presenting today and got feedback that should be incorporated into the documents you're working on, if you could do that before the draft cutoff, then those will go into the hopper for airtime in Yokohama. Suhas.
Will work with Christian and others, and also the meeting notes, to see if I can update the data model PR. I have received some comments on too much of text, so I'll probably reduce that as well to keep it more focused, and I'll try to get the PR to the state where it can be reviewed again.
Okay. Alan, were there other things you wanted to pull into the discussion about planning for Yokohama?
No, I guess if we're obviously not that far away, so if folks have other things they want to talk about, please, we'll send out a call for agenda items on the list soon. As we try to build the agenda, we do have 2 meetings scheduled. They're late in the week. There's not that much time between them, so that's some advantage for starting late. Means we can potentially get some work done for people who are there, but then we don't have a lot of time to follow up from the first meeting and help that feed into the second meeting. So keep those things in mind. Yeah, I'm not sure there's any other actions we have right now.
Okay, then just a reminder to everybody that we are actually quite late in the week. So we have a final agenda now, and we have the last slot on Friday. So after our discussions, you will definitely be able to go out for a beverage or some other refreshment in the Yokohama hinterlands if you're not getting in a cab to get to one of the airports. If you believe you need agenda time and we didn't discuss it today, please send a note to the list and to me and Alan, and we'll start dealing with those as they come in. And I think that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for your time and for the very useful discussion.
Yeah, thanks also to the scribes or scribe. Thank you, Martin. Be ready to sign up to scribe in Yokohama, people. We can't keep relying on the same people. But yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for terrific input today, and don't forget to make good choices.